Without further ado, we'll get started and talk about how retail is being reinvented through mobile and through all the things that we're talking about here. Before I get started, I'm going to try and make this interactive as possible. So forgive me if I repeat things that have already been said 30,000 times. We'll do our best to be innovative and insightful. How many of you actually think that retail is being innovated right now? 1, 2, 5, 6. Okay. How many of you? 10 maybe. How many of you think that it's kind of the same like it was a couple years ago? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. How many think that like nothing will ever change because of all the, at least here in the U.S., because of all the legacy stuff that we have? 1, maybe 1, 2. Okay. So why don't we start going down the list? Thad, if you want to start. Name, background, and maybe something interesting that no one else here would know about you.
Okay, my name is Thad Peterson. I'm a senior analyst at IT Group. Been at IT Group for about 2.5 years. My area of coverage is the merchant side of payments, emerging payment technologies, and mobile payments. In terms of something that few people know about me, I got the opportunity to ride through a typhoon when I was in the Navy and spent 5 days in the middle of a typhoon on a ship. So there you go.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for our service to this country.
That's a tough act to follow. So I'm Evan Bacher. I'm the senior analyst on e-commerce for BI Intelligence, which is Business Insider's research arm. Yeah, I don't know. Fun fact for me, I'm in a rock band. So that's my moonlight job. I play guitar and vocals.
Cool.
There you go.
So, yep.
Man.
What kind of rock band?
Yeah, what kind of? Yeah. Are you on Spotify?
It's alternative, I guess. Alternative rock, alternative pop, whatever you want. I don't know.
All right, so he's moonlighting in the exhibit hall afterwards. There'll be
Yeah, if anybody has a guitar.
And Tim Spenny, I am Senior Vice President of Research Consulting at GFK. Maybe you guys have seen me throughout the conference. So I focus on, I manage the relationship with the large operator here in the United States globally, and then my other half of my job is really, understanding the industry, providing thought leadership, writing white papers, that kind of thing. Interesting fact, I relocated to Southern California from the Midwest last October, and I'm not necessarily a spring chicken, and I took up surfing in March, and right before I came here I bought a shortboard. Does that mean anything to anybody? Yeah, so when you typically start surfing, you start on like a 9-foot board, and now I'm down to a 6-foot board, so that's pretty good progress in a few months. So
well, there you go.
I'm looking to get back to the waves.
Well, there you go. My name again was Daniel Choka, and interesting fact about me, other than having been in the industry for many years, which is why I have no hair left, I actually used to be a classical violinist. So not quite a rock band, but classical violinist. Okay, so as we look at, we're a whole bunch of musicians, or wannabe musicians, I guess I'll say, for myself. A bunch of hippies, yes. So hopefully we feel right at home amongst our family and friends. As we look at retail and it being reinvented, or either we believe it's being reinvented, or it's not changing, or it's about the same. The last speaker said something I thought that was interesting, that mobile and whatnot actually is giving the merchant more control of their customer. And in an effort to maybe be provoking thought, how about that? I think Thad maybe had a different view or a different opinion. I think that he shared earlier to me that the merchant has lost control of the customer.
Yeah, let me explain that a little bit. Up until the world of mobile that we're exploring, the customers, the total amount of customer control over the retail experience was when they showed up at the store. Once they got to the store, the merchant experience was completely managed and controlled by the merchant. It was merchandised, so I'm sure you guys have all been through the department stores, especially the cosmetic sections where you have to wander around the different kiosks to make sure you see everything. That entire experience was controlled by the merchant. Now, with mobile, suddenly the merchant has very little control of anything. They don't control where you're looking for stuff. They don't control when they're looking at your stuff. They don't control how you're looking at their stuff. So in essence, the consumer has gone from really not having any control at all other than when to show up at the store, to the fact of the matter is we totally control the experience and dictate to the merchant how that experience will be handled.
And that's a very interesting insight. I mean, we know the examples of a movie theater, right? We go to a movie theater, we're hungry, we want popcorn, we want a snack. The merchant has a very controlled environment there. We have to pay $8 for 25 cents worth of popcorn, right? I mean, that's, I think, the definition of the merchant being in control there. However, now as we engage with retailers, there's a lot different. How about that? Let's put it that way. There's a lot different in terms of how consumers engage. Whether it's retail me not, whether it's whatnot, you can't go drive by an intersection where there's all kinds of stores and you start getting all these coupons and whatnots and different types of offers. So I do think that there has certainly been a fundamental change in how merchants can engage with customers. So would we agree that there's the ability to do that? Is that consensus? I mean, from your perspective, Tim, how can merchants engage with customers more effectively today as a result of these changes we're seeing?
Yeah, I think the challenge for a lot of retailers is really managing the omni-channel experience. Mm-hmm. So when we ask consumers about their experiences using retailers or using mobile apps, I mean, what we typically find is there's somewhat of a disconnect between what they experience online, let's say on a laptop, what they experience using their phone, and then what they experience in the store. So this, for a consumer perspective, and this goes for not only traditional retailers, like what you mentioned, but also financial institutions, it creates this environment where the retailer or the financial institution doesn't really know their customer, for instance. So, and you could add other layers or channels to that, right? So if they're calling in on the phone, or if they're speaking to someone in person and that person doesn't realize that they've had an issue or they're trying to solve for a particular problem, it creates this negative experience for them. So there's a real challenge for not only retailers but financial institutions to create this consistent experience where there's an environment of leveraging the data that companies, retailers, financial institutions have on their customers to create an experience that's positive versus a disjointed or disconnected experience for consumers. So I think that's the opportunity and the challenge. Right?
I think you've hit the nail right on the head. I had a conversation last year with the president of First Data, and he shared that data to the banking industry and to everything that we're talking about here is like an untapped oil reserve, and we have a 100-year supply that we're really not tapping into. And I think that's exactly right. That's the challenge of the data. And quite frankly, a wise person told me recently that it's really not about omni-channel, it's about uni-channel. I think that was your phrase?
Yeah. And let me try to explain that a little bit. The truth of the matter is, everyone in this room, we come from a world of disparate systems. That's what we grew up in. So there's a CRM system, there's a payment system, there's an inventory system, there's a back of the store system. Those are discrete systems. And our vision, because of the way we grew up, is we pull all those things together to create an omni-commerce experience. The fact of the matter is, my 18-year-old daughter doesn't see it that way at all. Okay, she doesn't know about disparate systems, and she could really care less. All she knows is she gets her phone out, or she goes to the store, she does whatever, and it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do when it's supposed to do it. And so the vision isn't really, let's pull all these systems together. The vision should be more customer-centric in saying they see one thing. What is that one thing that they see of us, and how do we make that happen?
And I think that's exactly right. I'll give you two use cases, and then I'll turn it over to Evan for kind of tying it in from an international perspective. I was working on a project last fall in South Africa with Barclays, and it took, working with the business side of the bank, it took on average 90 plus days to approve an application for a business loan. Even when this customer was also a regular retail banking customer, he had a business account, but when he signed up for the new loan, he had to submit all the paperwork in terms of address verification, name verification, and whatnot, because the databases were stored in literally 100 different databases, all these different data files. So because of all these back-end disparate systems, we had that broken experience. Or vice versa. Let's switch to any mobile banking app. I go in my lovely, is anyone from Chase here, by the way? Okay, I'll use Chase. So it's my bank. So I'm in my fantastic Chase mobile banking app. It's a great app. It's visually pleasing. It gives me all the information I want right there. But if I have a problem with my account, I hit help. Check out any of your mobile banking apps. It'll take you to an 800 number. What does it do? It drops me into an IVR. The first question the IVR asks is, para español, marque tres. I've been a Chase customer for 25 years. I've never spoken Spanish, but it still gives me the option, hasn't authenticated me. Then when I finally get to a person, they're like, how can I help you? Well, I was just in the, I have a question on this bill pay transaction. So how come those systems don't talk to each other? And I think that's really where the fundamental challenge of all these different channels and really how it has to be uni-channel. So back to Evan here, or actually first to Evan here. How are some international players or ecosystems, we've seen other parts of the world be successful. Why?
Yeah, so I think, you look at markets like China, Kenya, they all have their success stories, right, of different mobile payment platforms. And I think I said this on a panel yesterday, but, China is effectively 9 years ahead of the US in terms of mobile payment volume. Of course, it's a much bigger country, but you still think about it and you look at their ecosystem there, and it is much less fragmented, right? And also, as many of us know, they were able to kind of leapfrog some of the legacy systems that we're still grappling with here in the U.S. But if I could actually go back to connected, sort of the connected payments that we were talking about earlier, and with uni-commerce, I really like that word, by the way. I think in the U.S., something that's really, really, really going to help out and help transform retail is the proliferation of connected devices. So this isn't the smartphone payments conference, right? This is the mobile payments conference. We're not just thinking about the smartphone forever. And if you think about wearables, connected home devices, connected car devices, or connected car platforms, you could see a future not that far off in 10 years when the average consumer has maybe 5 devices. And for retailers, what that means is that actually opens up more platforms for them to become, basically top of mind for the consumer. So maybe I use the Target app while I'm driving in my car to go pick up groceries. But, maybe I use Amazon for my smartphone, or maybe I use, Walgreens for my wearable device, right? So I think that is the sort of, those new devices, I think, is where you're going to see both a surge in uni-commerce and omnichannel, but also that opportunity for different retailers to compete in different areas. So it's not just going to be any more about app crowding on a smartphone. And so that's a really innovative way where I think the U.S. can create its own very unique market.
So let's dive a little bit deeper on that, right? Connected devices, IoT, Internet of Things. It's not quite the focus of this conference. However, when we look at reinventing retail and we look at mobile payments, and I think someone, thankfully shared the Uber example. We all have to talk about it, but what would Uber be if the payment part wasn't simple, right? But as we look at, and the payments obviously is going to drive it, but when we look at everything being connected, whether you look at Gartner statistics or different statistics, whether it's 20 billion connected devices by 2020 or 50 billion devices connected by 2020, there'll be a whole bunch of devices connected to the internet by 2020. There are specific use cases that I've personally worked on with global top 3 auto manufacturers, with global top 100 banks, that they are putting these types of things in place where I'm driving from Hoffman Estates to downtown Chicago, and I can not only find my parking, but select my parking, pay for my parking before I get there and have it reserved and just park instead of having to drive around 20 minutes trying to find parking. We already have it in our apps here. I can order Starbucks before I get there and pick it up. Well, why can't I do that from the car? Why can't, as my car is driving, this is a real world use case, where I have 2 gallons of gas left, and the gas station a mile away sends me a notification saying if I refill in the next 5 minutes, it's double points. It's, we saw the mobile pay example, and then essentially connecting, because my car is connected to the cloud and to the retailer, that type of engagement. That's where I believe things are headed. The question is, how do we get there? What are the impediments for us getting there? I'll start with you, Tim, and then go to Thad.
Yeah, we do a global, I presented this morning a couple slides from our global shopping study called Future Buy, and we look at 25 countries, 17 categories to understand shopping behaviors, including online and offline, mobile payments, in-store, and online as well. So what we see is, and the way that I look at these countries and how it leads back to your question of how do we get there, is when you look at advanced markets, what I refer to as kind of payments 3.0. So this is just a few countries on the planet that have reached
By the way, everybody's writing payments 3.0 down. I saw that.
This is a coin term, okay? So payments 3.0, what that means to me, based on the research, is that there's ubiquity met, and people are using a mobile app for their shopping experience and its integrated payment system, much like you would see with an Uber. So if you look at countries like Sweden or China or Kenya or Uganda, of course, they have advantages to be able to leapfrog the infrastructure, but the learning there is that what happens to retailers when there is a unique commerce experience is that consumers are, and I wrote it down, Richard Ventura said it earlier, experience centers. So if I go into a retailer in China and I have the ability, it's a very small store, but I can showroom using their interactive display, it knows who I am, and I can browse their full inventory. I can order something there and have it delivered to the store and pay for it after I've looked at it. This is a really different way to look at the mobile phone and the shopping experience in a Payments 3.0 environment. If you step back to a Payments 2.0, what that means is that we're beyond security concerns and we're into a consumer-centric offering, right? So this is kind of like a Mexico or a Singapore where there is a consumer-centric positioning around mobile payments and shopping in store, but it hasn't reached ubiquity, so or commonality. And then you step back to Payments 1.0, and that's kind of where Western Europe and U.S. We're still talking about security. Everyone was talking about security today, and that's the biggest barrier. If you ask anybody, this is the thing that when it comes up on a survey, right? If you ask me, out of a list of attributes, what's most important when I get on an airplane, and you put security or safety in that, it's going to be security and safety.
Yeah.
But if you ask me why I flew here on United Airlines, it's because of value-added services. Yeah. It's because of the experience that I get when I fly United. So although security is
but that's tied into loyalty, right? The experience
that ties into loyalty, exactly. And that's a value-added service. It's not the airline or the plane, it's the value-added service. So what I see with mobile payments is sort of the same thing, and I do truly believe that adoption of mobile payments will transform the retail experience based on what we see in 3.0. Mm-hmm. So although security is a barrier, it's not a driver. A driver of usage is more value-added service.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think loyalty is a huge play there. I mean, my wife likes to refer to me as, having the premier exec butt, right? Because I like the loyalty and the value to service it gets from my status or 1K or whatever the status that we are. So I think that's absolutely a driver. Go ahead, Thad. I know that you had some thoughts here on this.
Well, one thing I was thinking about is that since the beginning of time, the process of buying something has been pretty steady. You had to go through, you met with let's just put us 2,000 years ago. You met with whatever merchant it was, you negotiated a price, you got the goods, and at the end of that, you paid for it and they received the money. That model has stayed with us since basically the beginning of commerce. That's what, again, we've been trained to experience. And now what we're doing is we're taking that little node of the end of the transaction, the end of the process of commerce, and burying it in the overall commerce experience. So in one way, what we're doing is making payments as plumbing instead of payments as a really big deal at the end of the transaction. And I think that's kind of where we're going. How we get there, I think, is probably going to be an evolutionary process of 55 different things working all at the same time in the same direction.
And an interesting perspective. So we talked earlier with our group that there's kind of three things we see as impeding the adoption of this. Ubiquity, which was mentioned. The value proposition goes back to value to services. And the third, of course, is interoperability. So let's get a little bit of dialogue with the audience, because I don't want your eyes to gloss over. And so if we put down the popcorn for a second, and if we look at it from this perspective, if I can have a vote, is it ubiquity? Is it value-added services or value proposition or interoperability that is the biggest thing that's impeding the adoption of this? So who is voting for ubiquity? Who is voting for value proposition? Lots of hands. And who is voting for interoperability? Less hands, but still some hands. Okay, because of EMV adding 8 to 10 seconds to the transaction. Did it go through yet? Did it go through it? Did it go through it? Oh, no, I'm sorry, we don't have the chip, you got to swipe. Okay, because of that, that it's going to drive mobile adoption. Fair assessment? How do we agree? Yes, agree? Folks have any comments? Evan?
Well, one thing I would say, I definitely agree, generally speaking, with that. But I'm also interested about Visa Quick Chip, MasterCard Quick Chip, all the card networks have that. And I know that it doesn't actually speed up the transaction, but technically speaking, but from the eyes of the consumer, at this point, a lot of big retailers have that system where it's like 2 seconds, right? Like cards in, cards out, still processing, but the user experience at least starts to mimic the swipe a little bit more again. And so I think from that, if that that transition happens smoothly, as it should, then I don't know if EMV will necessarily spur the mobile payments adoption.
I just had another thought on this, because the real question is, how do we make it happen? How does the transformation happen? And one, I hate these. I shouldn't use the word hate. I'm trying to not. I dislike the overuse of Starbucks and Uber. But the reason that Uber works so well is because the service is so great that I don't mind sharing my name, my location, my credit card, and all of that. Mm-hmm. So I don't mind giving my data away or my private information away to get the value of having a car show up. But more importantly to the transformation point is that the payment is just hidden. It's not really a thing. It's just buried.
I've got a question for the audience. How many here have teenage girls? Okay. Close enough. Okay. How often are they without their phone in their hand?
Yeah.
Never. Never.
Fall
Okay?
asleep with their phone.
Where's their driver's license? It's in the car. Where's their debit card? It's in the car. Where's their phone? It's in their hand. And that's going to be a massive transition when your generation starts to move up and starts to really spend stuff. Because
You're a teenager now, Evan. But he makes a great point. Because the phone is always with him. However, just because the phone is with me doesn't necessarily mean that I went through the effort of taking my driver's license and my debit card and credit card info and putting it on here. So, for instance, I love Panera. My kids and my wife, they love Panera. We go there a lot. We were there a couple months ago and introducing Samsung Pay at Panera. I'm like, great, I got a Samsung, not an iPhone. Download the app, great. Works with Chase, great, I'm a Chase customer. Hey, how's this for onboarding? Take a picture of my credit card, great. Everything, oops, that specific type of credit card we don't accept, only the Sapphire. Really? So it goes back to ubiquity, works everywhere, every time. And back to your point about the willing to give up data, how many of us have ever been at a cash register and it said, if you give us your email, we'll give you $10 off on this transaction? How many of you have ever done that? Okay, I've done it. So there are compelling reasons why we'll give up some. The challenge is how much. And that's where I believe from a data perspective, we shift there. It's about we need to be big mother, not big brother. Right? We need to nurture the customer, not stalk them, right? In terms of offers and whatnot. The offers need to be timely, actionable, and relevant.
I think there is value to the merchants to adopt this and create that experience and drive that loyalty to their stores using value-added services and mobile payment.
But if I go back to the cash-based comment, there are a lot of merchants in the U.S., a lot of merchants that are not credit card and they're not using this, right? Another thing that back to the payment experience, how seamless. In Chicago, we've been paying tolls for how many years for the road that's already been built, but that's another story. But every time I go through toll booth, I don't know that I paid the toll. And I'll keep driving through. They don't even tell me how much I paid nowadays. And the last point about Walmart. Walmart, great, I like the previous gentleman talked about Walmart Pay, but the education of it. Last week, I went to pick up my son's bike that we had reordered because it needed to get done, and I used my Walmart Pay, and you can select when you get to the store in the app that, hey, I got to the store, so they can get it ready and pull it out for me. Well, it wasn't there. It wasn't working. When I walked back, I said, hey, what about this Walmart Pay thing? I can let you know that I showed up here. Said, oh, it doesn't matter. It's not working because we don't even have anyone trained in the back to look at this to pull the bike out for you. So big deal that the technology is there, right? So there's so many moving pieces, and I know our time is fleeting. So if I can take the security question back to the days of the internet. I mean, I remember when I first got the internet and set it up for my dad, and 18 minutes later, the computer was shut off and he's reading the paper because, that thing will never work, right? We can talk stories there. But my dad still doesn't want to put his credit card on the internet because it's unsafe. So I think there's a lot of perception on that as well. I mean, we all know that there's no difference, and we all know that from a technology perspective, tokenization is vastly superior. We all know that. Doesn't matter that we know it. It's the perception, I think, that becomes the reality in the marketplace. So how do we change that? We still have to change that. Last thoughts, and then I'll come and give you last question. So I'll start with Ed, with you first.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Sorry. Well, I'm going to end with you too, so that's okay.
Okay, just one last thought in terms of EMV accelerating the process. In Europe, where EMV has obviously been there for a while, dual interface cards that are both contactless and contact EMV are rocking and rolling, and lots of people are using them. Why? Because it's faster and more convenient to tap and pay than it is to stick the thing into the slot and wait for it. There has been some rumor or some expectation that would occur over here, although the issuers know that it's going to cost a lot of money to do that, and they're not exactly excited about that idea. But there is a hypothesis that instead of going to contactless, that will accelerate the move to NFC mobile, because it functionally does the same thing without having to do a contactless card.
Evan?
Yeah, and I actually wanted to say something about interoperability, because I think that in the future that's going to be the most important. So if you think about how fragmented the US market is with all the different devices, all the different options, one thing that I'm willing to bet on is that tokenization will become more and more prevalent, more important, especially as people have multiple devices. And if you think about it, like when electricity, was first basically invented, or whatever you want to call it, 100 plus, many years ago, if you think about, power outlets, right? Imagine if every single new electric device maker decided to have their own type of power outlet. They're just like, I'm going to make my own unique one. No, nothing would work anywhere. You couldn't plug in anything anywhere else. Similarly, with mobile wallets and mobile payments in the future, you're going to want to have one standard, and that's going to be tokenization. And so what that means, the conclusion there is that whoever owns the tokens is going to control the mobile payments market. In the US, that's the card networks. And that's probably what it's going to be, in my opinion. If I had to place a bet on somebody, Visa and MasterCard are in the best position right now for the future, because they're going to own your digital identity, your token that you put on all your devices, because you're not going to want to do it 16 different times. And maybe it won't be them, but whoever controls the tokens controls the future, I think, for mobile payments.
Tim?
Yeah, just a last thought, getting back to reinventing this retail experience through mobile payments. I mean, in my mind, what I think it would look like, and what we see in Payments 3.0 countries, is that you walk up, after you've gathered the things that you want to purchase, you walk up to a smart kiosk. It recognizes who you are. It processes your rewards and your coupons. It double checks your shopping list to make sure you didn't forget anything, and it processes your payment, and you walk out the store. It alleviates the idea of waiting online to check out. It frees up salespeople to facilitate sales and help people in the back of the store at Walmart when you've ordered something and pick it up. And it helps really improve that customer experience in retail. This is what I imagine mobile payments doing for consumers and transforming the retail environment. How long that will take is up to the interoperability issues, the design of value-added services that resonate with consumers, and then getting over security. And I agree with Evan that the tokenization is where it's at. So that's my final thought.
So we're now going to put on our genie hats. You have one thing in 24 months, each of you, and start backwards. We're done with this. What is one thing that's going to be happening in the payments industry in 24 months, or in our industry we're talking about, that is not happening today?
I think it's a proliferation of buy buttons. I think you're going to really see those just about everywhere that you can shop online or on your phone. Buy buttons, and it'll use the tokenization.
Evan?
I keep harping on this, but IoT payments for sure. Everything I'm talking about right now is kind of hard to imagine, because you don't see it right now, right? You don't see people making payments in very different ways. But 2 years from now, absolutely, people are going to be making payments through an augmented reality, through a virtual reality, through platforms that are still in their nascent stages.
Ed?
Mobile payments are going to start to ramp quickly in the next 12 months. NFC is starting to become prevalent at all the retail locations. We're into our second generation of NFC-enabled phones, so the ramp is about to start.
All right. Well, I predict that in 12 months, everyone will be back here at this conference, right? All right. Thanks so much.